freedom is as much about having something compelling and exciting to look forward to every single day. And I've always sort of described the work I do as helping people, figure out a way to develop a stronger internal climate to support living and performing well. For me to have a chance to change those behaviors, to change my perception and my conception of what money is and wealth could be, etc., I have to begin to communicate to my mind something better.
This all reminds me of something you told me just a few weeks ago. We're born limitless. Life teaches us who we think we are. I wrote, but it creates constraints.
If we can 6 out of 10 commit to it, that's not a great goal, because that tells me that you're only going to be consistent 60% of the time.
Let's bring in Grant White, portfolio manager,
an investment advisor.
Welcome to the Finding Your Wealth podcast. What this whole podcast is about is redefining the conversation around wealth.
The whole thing is absolutely a bit of a tire fire, in my opinion. I don't like drama, and this stock is surrounded by drama.
So welcome, Jason. Welcome to the Finding Your Wealth podcast. I'm so excited to have you on as my first guest. And really, I couldn't think of anybody else that I'd want to have as my first guest on this because you and I've known you, it must be over 5 years. It's certainly over 5 years now. It's more like 7 or 8 years, I'm guessing, at this point. And you've been along the ride for my journey in finding my freedom up to date anyway. And you will be with me for the whole time. I know that, but I'm so grateful to have you here because you've helped me out tremendously over the years. And I know that the advice that you can give people is going to be tremendous as well. So thanks so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Grant. What a pleasure. And what an honor. The first ever. Wow. Thank you.
Well, there's no other place I could start, man. So this is great. I like to do this when I have people on and when I talk to people now is I do this for myself and I'm ranking my own freedom. Try to do this on a daily basis now, like between 1 and 10. And so I'd love to hear how you're feeling today as it relates to your own freedom, because we know freedom, true wealth is freedom. And so I'd love to hear where you're sitting at today.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I guess, probably first it'd be useful to define what my conception of freedom would be. Obviously there's the traditional sense, freedom as, sort of the absence of certain worries or constraints or fears. And, that's part of it. Obviously, I don't think I'm immune from certain worries, constraints, and fears in life, but I think you learn to keep them in context and keep a perspective on them. I also think for me, freedom is as much about having something compelling and exciting to look forward to every single day. So I think for me, that's where a lot of my freedom comes from, is just being committed to a vision of myself and my relationships and the work that I do that excites me, and trying every single day to get better at those things and provide more value to people. So when you put it in that context, my sense of freedom is quite high. I mean, nothing's ever perfect, but I'm proud to say we're probably a solid 9 out of 10. How's that? And I don't know if there'd be a 10 out of 10 on my list. So 9's pretty good.
Yeah, that's impressive. That's something I struggle with as well. Is is there actually a 10 out of 10? Like the 10's on the scale.
Yeah.
But, when you're constantly seeking and pushing and trying to do more, do you ever actually reach a 10? Is it even valuable to get to a 10? I don't know for me.
Yeah. I
mean, everybody can define it themselves, but 9, that's good. I don't know if I've ever been at a 9 personally, but that's why I'm doing this in the first place. And that's why I'm sharing my journey.
And if I could just qualify quickly, Matt, and again, that does not mean that, there's things in my life that I wouldn't like to see in a better state of being or, working on certain things, etc. But again, I think overall, when I look at the totality of the things I'm committed to and what excites me, there's a lot of freedom there. I still got a lot of work to do to reach some of the goals and dreams. And listen, there's ups and downs with all of that. But I think just the fact that I'm on a path that I find so exciting and aligns with what matters to me, that's where my freedom comes from.
I think that's so important too. And we're going to dive into this, but I think that's so important, is being on track to achieve the things that you define as your freedom.
Yeah.
That's a freeing thing. We see that, in the clients that we work with on a daily basis.
Yeah.
And actually that brings me to, what I want to get into with you to begin with, which is really understanding what it is that you do for people that you work with, because you work with a wide variety of people.
Yeah.
Ranging from people like myself, like entrepreneurs, business owners, and people like that, right through to medical professionals, special forces, SWAT teams, things like that. People like that, I should say. when I think about the work, and this is a more recent thing for me, the last few years, I think it was always there. And it's kind of that Simon Sinek why. It's like, it's always like, it's deep inside you, but understanding it is the important part.
Yeah.
But when I look at the work that we do in the wealth management business today, and I've gone through this process of redefining it, and really what I boil it all down to is my whole purpose, my whole reason for being in this part of like my life, in this profession, is to help people to live a life of freedom, is to help them to achieve that, give them the opportunity to live a life that they choose and be intentional about that. And that's the reason I get out of bed in the morning now. And when I think about that, all aspects of my life are kind of pushing towards that, whether it's other businesses I'm involved with or my philanthropic work, that's all there. And when I think about you and as a performance psychologist, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I think about it a lot the same way. And I'm curious, do you feel that that's a big part of what it is you're doing for people, or how do you feel about it?
Yeah, certainly. I think freedom is one of the, what would you say, services or commodities that I'm in the business of. There's no question about that. I've always sort of described the work I do as helping people, figure out a way to develop a stronger internal climate to support living and performing well. And you go to a little bit further down the weeds into that type of description. And it's because for a lot of us, we get caught up in, limiting beliefs and ideas about ourselves and what's possible. And we've been influenced with certain experiences in our life, which might have us, doubting certain capabilities and possibilities. We carry lots of stories forward about, who we are and what we think we can do. And so I help people a lot of the time just get more clear on, there's what you think of yourself, but what's possible. A lot of the stories that we carry forward that are limiting, if you dissect them, they're filled with a lot of half-truths and untruths. And sometimes we just need to update the software. Like there's tons of information available that if we shine the light on it, you realize, maybe I am more capable than I'm allowing myself to think and feel at times. So I help people get into the weeds there. And in a weird way, I think it's, one of my favorite definitions. And I don't just function in the field of performance. And sometimes it's just helping people, achieve a greater sense of well-being in their lives. But if we look through the performance lens for a second, this idea that performance equals your potential minus interference. I've always loved that definition. I help people step into and identify what is the interference? What's actually preventing you from, fill in the blank, experiencing more freedom, more joy, more happiness, more whatever, health, whatever in your life. So if I look at it through the lens of what you do, I think there's a lot of grounds. But I would maybe ask you the question, or realize you're here to ask me questions, but I think I'm biased as well. But I think that's also unique to you and your particular company, that's something that you focus on. Is that the norm in your field, or is this something new?
No, I mean, I think that's the reason why we created the company in the first place, and the reason why we continue to push in new directions is because it's not the norm. I mean, and I would say this isn't just relative to the wealth management industry. This is relative to a lot of traditional industry or a lot of businesses. Is that they don't necessarily it's not just about selling a widget or providing a service without any meaning behind that. I mean, I think there's a deeper meaning to, especially the iconic businesses, the businesses that we all are inspired by, the brands that inspire us, like whether it's, some of the ones that I look up to would be like Apple, certainly, or Disney. And you think about the deeper mission, Virgin, of course. I mean, you got my Virgin plane right here and my Richard Branson book over this shoulder. I mean, those companies are defined by the purpose, not by the products that they deliver or the services. They're defined by their purpose that's behind them. And understanding that purpose, is what we're getting into right now that's the reason we create these things in the first place. And I've said many times, at Endeavor Wealth Management, we focus on wealth management, but I could be focusing in on 100 different things with the same purpose behind it. And actually that's part of my goals, is to have 100 plus different things that are all pushing in that same direction. So, I think we're very similar as it relates to that. And that's one of the reasons why I think that this, having you on to talk about, is so important, because, when we get into, when it's helping somebody to find that wealth in their life, that freedom in their life, there's so many things that get in the way of that aren't just financial related. Right. I mean, we went through in the first episode that I had, was about defining the process that I'm going through to find wealth, and the process that we're walking our people through to define that wealth and to find that wealth, I should say. But a big part of that, especially when we get into in the beginning, understanding what their vision really is for that life of freedom.
Yeah.
One of the big parts of that is what constraints get in the way of that, and certainly there's financial constraints. I mean, that's the one that people all think about.
Yeah,
it's like, I could never afford that, or I don't have enough money to do it yet, but I will, or whatever. But as we know, there's so many other constraints that get in the way of people even defining that vision so well. And you touched on it a little bit, but I'd love to hear more from you on that, because, like these mental blocks that hold us back, or a mental or whatever it is, are so limiting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, to your point, I mean, if someone is struggling, let's say, and that's, we're talking a bit down the financial pathway, let's stick there. So if someone has, certain expectations, certain experiences and stories related to money, maybe money's always been tight, maybe they learned that growing up. So they carry that energy around money to now as an adult making financial decisions. And so they might be doing everything right. I mean, have the best team behind them doing all the right moves, and even the results might be coming. But if you're deeply convinced still that money's always tight, money's always the first sign of something, the markets go down or up, all of a sudden you might have a panic reaction and, make a choice that's not wise. So it is important to understand, okay, if that's how I am, if I'm carrying that type of energy around wealth and finances, I step back and I go, okay, first thing is, what would a vision of better look like? If I could snap my fingers, if I was their, wealth manager or what have you, or even signing confidant, say, gosh, that's pretty heavy to be constantly worrying about that, even in the face of lots of evidence that can suggest, hey, your money situation's fine. What would better look like? I need them to come up with that. There's people much smarter than me that have said things along the lines of, if you want to have a different experience of yourself in the future, you got to bring a different set of cues or data, to the moment. So, what is a new story around money that we could begin to carve out for ourselves? And again, specifically, what are some things related to a vision of what better could be? Maybe we could identify those things and then work backwards with some plans or a process or the right types of supports to begin to carve out a new and better story that now, when it relates to finance, at least there's not as much resistance. I'm not getting in the way of myself. So to your point, we all carry those stories. And if we can catch ourselves in a moment, recognizing, am I really perceiving, in this case, a financial decision through the lens of, what's right? Or is there some fear, some old story, that's kind of kicked me out of frame, and now I'm caught up in that. And that's what's dictating my actions. To know the difference is really important.
Yeah. This all reminds me of something he told me just a few weeks ago. I think it was Peter Crone. Do I have the right name?
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm going to mess this up, so you're going to correct me. But
sure.
We're born limitless.
Yeah.
And life teaches us who we think we are, but it creates constraints.
Correct. That's exactly it.
Yeah, that stuck with me when we were talking just a few weeks ago. Because it's like, we're born with this limitless possibility, and then life teaches us these constraints about like what we can and can't do, or what our expectations, or what other people's expectations are of us. And I thought about that a lot, just thinking about even myself, like the way I've grown up has impacted the way I've thought about like what I could possibly do in the past, And then that's not to say like anything negative about the way I grew up. I grew up great. But the point being is that if I want to live a life without limitation,
right,
then I have to shed myself of those things. Right.
Yeah.
And I thought about that a lot after you said it, because I'm like, man, like, I deal with like, hundreds of people on the wealth management side. My firm deals with thousands of people on the wealth management side. And so when you think about like the things that are holding them back, the things that they think they can do.
Yeah.
I mean, one, it's huge. I mean, like there's the fact that they're limiting themselves. They're not even bringing up the goals that they might want to actually have because they can't get past that. So,
well, if I could see one step further, Grant, and what's worse is, and I'm not going to speak for you and your clients, but I think a lot of people, when it comes to wealth and finance, the worry and the focus is on what I don't have and what's not happening and where I'm not at. So it's always about what's not there. So if you think, okay, what type of messaging does that send, to deeper recesses of my mind about, where I'm at. Oh my God, I'm behind. There's danger. There's danger. There's danger. So all that stress, all that anxiety, it's almost now subconscious. Anytime we think of money, boom, I go into that state of being. There's fear. There's anxiousness because there's a story driving my perspective in and around money. The same guy we talked about, Peter Crone, shout out Peter Crone, has another saying that I like. He'll say that, life is really just circumstances and resistance. How are you relating to your circumstances? If the market goes up or down and I'm living or dying about it versus, markets go up and down, let's just ride this out. Nothing has changed in the external. The market still did whatever it did. But my perspective around it now is much more healthy. It's more neutral. This is what, economies do. They go up, they go down. So it's just one small example that if we can get better at having a perspective on, say, in this case, wealth and finances that serves us, where it's not always about where we're not at, what's not working. It's tough to draw in what you want when you're constantly focusing on what you don't have. It just doesn't work energetically.
So how would you advise somebody then to cut through that, if you will? Like, when you're talking to somebody about what their vision is for the life that they want to live, how do you and then granted we have a very short period of time, but like
no worries.
It probably take years. But like how would you advise somebody to cut through that so to actually get to that vision of what their true freedom would look like?
Well, it's interesting. I could sum this up pretty quickly. And I don't, Grant, you know me well. I don't function like okay, bullet point one. But in fairness, there is sort of a method, if you will. For me, when I first sit down with someone, there's kind of 4 key things that I want to get to know. And I think they dovetail nicely with some of the things that you've shared with me before, sort of method that you use. And that is, number one, as you said, okay, someone's coming to me and they like to change something. Again, maybe it's their views around finances, have a bit more freedom, even if their situation is what it is, but to feel differently about it. So again, we can't get to somewhere better unless we know what better looks like. So what's the vision for that? If I could snap my fingers, what's one thing that could be better? Oh God, I wish that, when someone brings up money, my heart doesn't start, pounding out of my chest. Okay, there's something specific we could begin to work on. So relatedly to that is, okay, we have a vision for what could be better. Then I'll ask, okay, someone who would be effective in that way, feeling better about finances, etc. What types of behaviors do you think they'd be doing and not doing? And are we doing those things? Could we be doing more? Well, what do you mean? Well, someone who's learning to teach themselves to be a little bit more at peace with the finances might recognize the difference between when there's a voice in my head worrying about finances because that's what it does versus, but is there anything else? What if I challenge that part of me in that moment that's caught up in the worry? What if Grant decided, hang on a sec, I'm feeling like my finances are behind, stressed, whatever it is. But is that true, in fact? And again, if we bring a little bit more rationality to our thoughts and feelings around the subject, if I can just begin to interface a bit better there and go, okay, wait, what's real and true about my circumstances? And then if I can go to something objective, in fact, my numbers suggest that we are making strides and we have a great team. And I know that I'm well supported, and whatever it is, next thing you know, I'm training that part of me that's wrapped up in the fear that maybe the danger is not so great. And all of a sudden, next time I face that with repetition, I begin to respond better than simply reacting to the stress of that. So that's one thing I do. Like I said to you, your behaviors are way ahead of the success and whatever changes you want to make. So what are some of the behaviors I can start to do every single day? When I catch myself perseverating, worrying, and shouting about money, etc., could I not do that? Did I get to neutral? I don't have to love the fact that maybe the market, went down for a bit that day, but can I get to neutral with it? Again, can I practice a little bit more neutral thinking? Oh, yes, I'm feeling stressed right now, but you know what? These things tend to level out. You know what? I could shoot Grant an email tomorrow. You know what? My uncle's good at finances. I'll call him and he'll just make me feel better whether he knows anything or not. Like, yes, you can get through this moment. So throwing your behaviors out there for sure. And I also think, and we're kind of talking in and around it, just taming that inner voice, recognizing that when I'm caught up in those self-limiting ideas about myself or about my finances, any other part of my life, that's not who you are. There is so much freedom and power that comes from recognizing that's a random thought trickling through your head about who you are. But I promise you, it is not who you are. Yes, I tend to worry at times about finances, says that voice in your head. But that doesn't mean that you are, now stuck being someone that forever has to worry about finances. We can shape and shift the narrative there. So working with that inner voice and not allowing it to dictate and responding to it, quite literally like having a conversation with, hey, I know that you're caught up in the worry, but here's what's real. Here's what's true. And the more times I, being present in that moment, steer me back to here and now, guess what the result is? Peace. What does peace sound a whole lot like? Freedom.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, you reminded me of something that you and I have talked about in the past as well, which is the feeling of not being worthy of that freedom or that ideal lifestyle. And I don't know where that comes from, but I do know a lot of people feel that way. They feel that, hey, I'm not good enough to have that, so I'm not even going to try, or I could never afford that, is a common thing that I hear. Yeah. And in my, like, when I'm talking to people, it's like, well, why not? That's the question I ask. Well, why not? Why, if that's your ultimate dream, like, why don't you think you could do that? But, I think that that's something that holds people back, even like whether it's like from setting what their vision is. They're like, oh, well, I mean, I know that's something that I face. And again, the part of this, the reason for doing this podcast is to be vulnerable and share with people that this is how I felt. But, I felt that way about things that I wanted to do. I held back my vision of what I wanted. And part of that for me was, I think it was more about other people than it had to do with me. It was more about me not wanting to make other people feel uncomfortable. Yeah. But in saying that, how should people approach that? Like, cause there's a lot of that out there and they might even recognize that in themselves. It's like, well, if my dream, for example, or my vision of freedom was to travel to, Hawaii every single year, as an example, that's something I need to do in order to feel free, because I absolutely love it there. Yeah. But I could never, the feeling might be, it's like, well, yeah, but that's for really rich people. That's not for me. Right. Like I could never do that, Well, how would you approach that with somebody?
Well, I think that the first thing, you've said it yourself, is, so let's just dissect that story a little bit. So there's a belief inside this person that, well, I'd love to do that, but that's just for fill in the blank, rich people who are not me. How's that? Okay, so we put that out there. And I'll write that down in front of them. That's for people who are not me. Okay, what about you doesn't qualify there? Well, currently we don't have enough finances. Currently I choose to do other things with my money. It's like, okay, but where's the part that says you can't? Do you know what I mean? Where's the part that says that you can't? And also, how strong of a desire do you have for that thing? Because sometimes people want things, but they're not willing to put in the work to get there. That's a totally different conversation. That's self-torture. I really want the baubles and the rewards, but if I'm being honest with myself, there's no way I'm going to put in the effort. But if there's someone who would put in the effort, and what's really hindering is just a belief that, but that's not for people like me, however you would define, that, whatever they're thinking of that inside themselves, we got to get through that story. So I want to poke some holes in that story, and I want to figure out what's factual about that statement and what is not. Because my degrees of freedom are going to come from figuring out what's not true about that story. And if I just ask that person, again, if they could demonstrate they had no ability whatsoever to generate whatever it would take to realize that, then I'm okay with that. But as you start to poke and prod it, what about this and how about that? You're going to find out that the real thing holding them back is simply just that story. And once you meet it with a lot more evidence that when we're under the threat, oh my God, I'd love to, but I can't, and that self-limiting belief is steering things, we don't take pause and go, but on the other hand, if I really focused on this, maybe I could. Nonsense. We get caught up in that story and we close off any consideration of anything other than that, right? Until we decide to interrogate that. And more times than not, I always tell people, look, people wonder if I'm about helping them be positive. Listen, I'll take positive over negative any day of the week. But I'm helping people be accurate. And I think what's a travesty is someone like that you're referring to is probably being inaccurate. They probably could achieve more of the dream that they'd like if not for that friggin' story that's running interference.
Yeah, See, like I look at, I think this is actually an unfair way of characterizing this because they're all real constraints, but I do characterize the way I've described them in the past anyways, like real constraints and not real constraints. And again, I think that's unfair because they're all
Of course.
just different.
Yeah.
Right? Like the financial constraints, to me, those are real. They're manageable and they can be planned for, but they're real. The ones that aren't real in my mind, but again, with the greatest, take that with a grain of salt, are the ones that we impose on ourselves, the self-imposed constraints that I'm not worthy of that, or I could never do that, or you name it, you know, whatever that happens to be, when you're doing that reflection. So in identifying those, because I think this is a hard thing to do. I mean, like people have, like, again, we were talking earlier about, you know, Peter Crone and like how we're born limitless, but then we basically, life and the world teaches us limits.
Yeah.
How do we even start to overcome those like self-beliefs that have been ingrained with us potentially since we were kids? And you know, we might have decades of behavior that have been taught to us. Like, how do we even begin to understand, one, what they are, and two, how to like potentially overcome that?
Yeah. Well, and again, I think it go back to recognizing how we are, right? And getting a vision for what better would be. So you'd have to pick one thing. So again, maybe we've been sticking on the financial thing. So maybe someone has that strong story about the finances. So again, for me to have a chance to change those behaviors, to change my perception and my conception of what money is and wealth could be, etc., I have to begin to communicate to my mind something better. You know, I have to begin to build the belief one thought at a time. Wait a second. I get that I've thought this way before, but if I really focus on things and if I really challenge myself, I think I could edge towards better in this way. So it is quite literally the act of just meeting that old story when it comes up with its limited conceptions of who we are, seeing it for what it is. Again, don't become that story. It's not who you are. Gosh, we do. It's, you're right. I forgot it's me. There's no way I could achieve. Why not? If not that belief. So it is the act of that. The story comes up. I have to differentiate. Who is perceiving my financial situation as far? Is it me based on what is actual and true and possible? Or is it air quotes me being disguised as this part of me that has this friggin' deeply held story around money? If I can recognize the difference, I then have the ability to choose in the moment a different response. If I just become that pattern idea and story about money, nothing changes. So that is the work. Can I see better? Can I recognize the moments when I'm caught up in the story that feels real? It's real to that person, your point earlier. And can I take a deep breath, reset, and recognize, no, I get what I'm feeling right now, and I totally understand where it's coming from. But in spite of that, here's some other bits of information I'm not focusing in on that would help. Here's some other truths about my financial future if I allowed myself. It could be there. Here's some things about what's possible that when I'm under the threat of that story, I just don't ever even consider. And I begin to, again, train that part of me that has the deeply held fear that maybe there's more freedom here than we think. Maybe there's a bit more agency here than we think. Maybe, just maybe, there's a bit more potential here than we think. And it's no different than if you were doing this with a young child who had a fear of something. It's just that gradual being there and supporting them, helping them get a perspective on it that's better, working through the fears or concerns they have in the moment, not judging them or overly critiquing them, but recognizing each time we do that, they're building that resilience. And the strength of that new story is beginning to take further root. So now what does it look like? Look, we're never going to not worry about money probably, but it comes up, I catch myself, I take a deep breath. Okay, wait, who's talking to me here? Oh, it's that part of me that's worried. Okay, what do you need? What do you mean? The markets went down. Everything's terrible. Who are you to think you could have a yacht? Okay. What do I need right now? I just need some perspective. Okay. Well, what's real and true? Here's where I'm at financially. Here's what could be true if I, got some supports. Here's a plan that might help me get there. And all of a sudden it seems doable. Didn't fight me, didn't beat myself up, just met me there, but edged towards better.
It comes back to, that's so many things. Living intentionally about the way you want to live, right? I know the word like living intentionally, or like that phrase is used a lot today, and it's much easier said than done. We know that, but I think as you were talking there, the thing I was thinking of is like, as far as we know, you get one kick at this thing called life, right? You get one shot at it, and you got to make it the best one you can. And again, I can speak from a little personal experience, but it's like, what's the point of holding yourself short? Like, what's the point of holding yourself back? And I think that we would all say that if we were being intentional and honest with each other about it. We would all say it's like, like, what is the point of it? But at the same time, it's again, I get that it's easier said than done. So when it comes to like, if you've gone through this process, you understand what your vision is for your life, you even gone as far as what you're talking about and understanding the constraints so that you can not respond or not react to them. You respond appropriately to them, whether it's a markets related thing or whether it's even like your own just personal feeling like yourself or whatever it is, but you can respond to that. You've gone through that. You can identify those constraints as they come up or you have a plan for them. Then it comes down to implementation. Like, you've set your goals. You've got a plan in place to achieve that freedom, that wealth in your life. What is the best way to implement change? Because again, I'll just speak from the layperson side as it relates to behavior. Behavior changes are hard.
Yeah, they are.
And conversion is hard. So,
sure.
So what is the best and most effective way in your mind to implement changes around these things so that you can get to where you said you want?
Yeah. I mean, one thing I always say to people is they're going to commit to some sort of change in their life, whether it's a certain belief they have about something, whatever, a health change, whatever it might be. In today's world where we're so busy and so distracted, if you don't systemize your efforts, it's going to be tough to stick to it. And then people ask me, they want to go into the weeds. What particular theoretical framework? Doesn't have to be that complicated at all. If someone was committed, say, to a health change and they have a busy vocation like you do and a busy family life, it's not enough to say, I really want to get into shape. That's great. Most people do. What does that actually look like? So what would we need to do? What would we need to put in place so that you have a chance to be consistent with the thing? Because if you can't be consistent, we're just not going to get anywhere. So to me, there has to be some sort of a system. And again, to illustrate someone wanting to improve their health, to me, a system would simply be, okay, if I use you as an example, Grant, 2 kids, wife at home, busy job, etc. The system would simply be, okay, when do you want to work out, Grant? I want to go 6 o'clock 3 times a week. And okay, can your wife or someone else look after the kids? Where will you go to do that? And can we do it consistently? When you think about doing it at 6 o'clock on a day where you're stressed or tired of this or that, do you think it's a 10 out of 10 most days you can get yourself there? If it's a 6 out of 10, that's not a great goal to set. We're going to fall off. So when you have systemized your efforts, what we're trying to do is just 2 things. Give you every possible chance to stay consistent, because that's where the change will happen. No consistency, no behavior change. And secondly, there's a little bit built-in structure which provides some accountability, which gives us more protection against the obvious resistance that's going to come from inside anytime we commit to a behavior change, right? So if you have a vision, you have a plan for how you want to do it, you've got some way to measure your results, and whatever they are, it has to be systemized. And again, it doesn't have to be complex. Just what has to be in place in order for me to have a chance to consistently do the thing I must.
Yeah, I think that being realistic about that, like, as I see this all the time as well. Like, again, and I'll speak for myself. Like, back before, using your health and fitness analogy there, the best way for me to be consistent in my health and fitness, it was to have a goal, like whether it was a race or an experience that I was training for. And last year when I did climbing the Blackcomb Mountain 8 times in a row to equal Mount Everest, like, that was the best thing that ever happened to me for my health. I can honestly say I'm the healthiest I've maybe ever been, certainly since I was playing competitive hockey. Yeah. And it was all because I had purpose behind it. Because there's mornings like, I train 5:30 in the morning. There's mornings I don't want to get out of bed, to your point of having 2 kids. Sometimes they didn't buy into the training program, So there's mornings you don't want to get up because the kids have been up all night and whatever. But I also know that there was that mountain I had to climb in a month. And if I don't do this, I'm not going to be able to do my ultimate goal. I'm not going to be able to achieve that thing. And that right now, I'm training for the Manitoba Marathon. I've never done a marathon before. Like yesterday was a prime example. I didn't want to go run 18 miles with everybody. Really didn't feel like it. I had a bunch of pizza the night before because I was, and that was all counterproductive to running that 18 miles. I still have to do it because I do know that in about, I think it's like 6 weeks away now, 6 weeks, I got to run 26 miles.
Yeah.
And if I don't do 18 yesterday, it probably wasn't going to happen. So it's those, having that purpose behind it has been really helpful.
Oh, that's huge.
I also found though, taking incremental steps is sometimes, so what I was getting at with that was if you say I'm going to train 5 times a week and you're going from 0 to 5 times a week, that might be an unrealistic thing to do.
Yeah.
You've never done that or anywhere close to it. Maybe you're that kind of person that can just flip that switch. I'm not. I have to make sure there's purpose behind it and it's something I can manage. Yeah. But maybe it's a matter of saying you know what, I'm going to commit to twice a week and then see how that goes. And then if that's working great, maybe you can go up to 3 and you can work your way up. I found that in working with people as it relates to their finances and building their financial situation, just getting them started is often the best thing that we can do. If we tell them they need to save, I don't know, like $2,500 a month, let's say, but they've never done anything before. Maybe it's going from 0 to 2,500 is not the thing to do. Maybe it's just getting on board with $100 a month or $500 a month or whatever it is. And then we can work our way forward because that's just it's a baby step in the right direction.
But to your point though, it's the building blocks of becoming someone who now sees themselves as fill in the blank, someone who invests consistently or contributes regularly or whatever, which is half the battle. I'll share a quick story. I think I've shared this with you before, but obviously not to your listeners. A friend of mine in the U.S., I work with a lot of physicians as well. And someone I've got to know, a friend of mine, his name's Salim Razai. He's an emergency medicine doctor in San Antonio, Texas. Great guy. He's very open about everything I'm going to talk about. And right before COVID, he had a few of his closest friends had very significant health problems that arose, and it kind of scared the heck out of him. He's younger than me. I just turned 50. He's probably early 40s. And, it just it was that proverbial slap in the face. He said, poof, I got to take my health serious. And I'm sure like a lot of people, he had tried before and committed to, big goals. But to your point, that maybe they weren't thought out as effectively, or just the pressures of life and demands overtook him. And, next thing you know, you fall off. So he didn't want that to happen this time. He really wanted this to be successful. And he recognized the pattern. Come out of the gates too hard, lose momentum, fall off. And so he committed to a line, which to me is beautiful because I think it has much application in your world of finances in terms of building wealth. And he said his motto for this crack at it was, he said, I was going to approach this based on the aggregation of marginal gains, meaning I'm not going to come out of the gates going 100 miles an hour because I know how that's going to end up. I'll be frustrated and beating myself up a week later when I'm no longer doing it at all. So for him, that meant something specific. He said, look, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to be very measured, because he knew it wasn't just the doing of the things. We could Google search how to behavior change anything we want. It's like, what's preventing me from sticking to it? He knew he had to earn the right to trust that he could, in fact, stick to the behavior change that he deemed was important. So then you go a step further. And it's like, wow, this small thing is actually teaching me to trust me. That's not a small little thing that's at stake. Let's leverage that. So for him, the way he approached it, he said the first, I think, 3.5 months, he didn't do anything physical. He just audited, cleaned up his diet. And his first and only goal, Grant, on this transformation journey that he had had for himself was, could he get himself to switch from regular soda to diet soda? That was the first and only goal. And it's so easy for that part of our brain to go, oh, God, this is going to take 10 years to drop 1 pound. That's where all that energy starts to come up. But he knew, he said, that is precisely the enemy to my success. That's the voice that wants me to go too hard, too fast, and get the same result. And he knew that every single one of the small behavior changes, okay, tackled the Coke, Diet Coke, and there was whatever, some other poor dietary choice. Every single one of those ones he was successful at, he was racking up wins. He was becoming someone who could stay consistent, who could change his health, who, could believe that it's possible, to the point where 3 months later, when it came time to do the physical stuff, he was already someone who was ready to become that guy. He had changed his identity and believed it was possible. Whatever many years later, 4 years later, man, I'd like to joke. I mean, he's ripped like a bus seat. You should see this guy. I mean, he just looks great, and he's healthy and he sustained it. Why? Because it was that slow aggregation of those marginal gains. Good goals, to me, the best goals are the ones that we can 10 out of 10 commit to. If we can 6 out of 10 commit to it, that's not a great goal, because that tells me that you're only going to be consistent 60% of the time.
Yeah. And again, from my own experience, when I was training to climb the mountain and working with the coaches that have done that, and talking to people who've climbed Mount Everest and done some of these things, the one question they ask is like, hey, do you know how to climb a mountain? I said, no idea. And they said, 1 foot at a time. And that's the simple answer, right? I mean, we don't know there's a lot of technicals that go into that. Like climbing Everest is no like small feat, obviously, but at the end of the day, it's one step at a time. It's one day at a time.
Well, and what a beautiful example here, Grant, of what we're talking about. So hey, let me ask you a question, rhetorical question. And any of those 29,000 feet of steps that you had to take, did you ever doubt if you could make it? Did you ever question your life choices? You did at times. But guess what? Very quickly.
Definitely on climb number 6.
Yeah.
I did. I mean,
but having said that, but very quickly you were able, but in spite of that, there was a meaning, there was a purpose that was stronger. It was stronger than the pain, stronger than the fatigue. What did that mean? You stuck with it. So again, we're not going to, face a life of just straight uphill, kind of a nice metaphor for what we're talking about here. Is the value in doing this thing? Is your process for staying consistent with the thing? Is it stronger than when it gets tough? Then when my mind starts to think, do I want to do this? If we allow too much of our feelings to dictate our actions, man, that freaking voice in our head is going to probably have us leaning towards comfort and protecting us, even though it's hurting us more times than not. It was not your feelings that motivated you in that moment. It was something deeper.
Yes. Oh yeah. 100%. I think there's so many different things that we could talk about on this, and I'm definitely going to have you back on to talk more as we explore this further for people, because I think this is some of the biggest challenges people face. I mean, again, given enough time, the financial challenges, like there's rarely a plan that we can't figure out as it relates to the finances. As long as the person is willing to commit. It's these types of things that I think require that reinforcement, that it's like, they might be feeling good for a day, but in a few months or a year from now or whatever it is, it's easy to revert back to that same feeling. So I'm definitely going to have you back on to chat more about this.
That's great.
This. I wanted to ask you one more thing, because this is something I want to ask all my guests as they come on. You touched earlier about you living your life of freedom. I just wanted to ask one more time though. You said you're a 9 out of 10, which is very impressive. I would guess most people that I bring on aren't going to be 9s out of 10s just yet.
Mm-hmm.
So it sounds like you're largely living that life of freedom today, but my question is, are you living that life really? And
I lost you, Grant.
Like for you.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Yeah. My question is, are you living a life of freedom, your life of freedom today? And what does that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm certainly allowing freedom in my life. That's a good way of looking at it. Now, again, going back to something I said earlier, my particular definition of what, freedom is and means to me. Partly the absence of certain concerns and fears, whatever, but I'm human. You still have those from time to time. To me, it's more so what I am committed to in my life, which is doing great work, trying to be the best husband and uncle and friend, and all the various roles and responsibilities that I have in my life. But another thing that's so important, Grant, that because me, I don't drive Lamborghinis or any of that stuff. That's great for people who do that. I wish you all the best. I have no problem with things or wealth or any of that stuff. But for me, I'm also a huge part of my personal freedom comes from just being at ease with the way things are, not worrying about this needs to be this way or why isn't this way. And just think of how many people are struggling in the world right now with some of the major events that are happening that people have, very impassioned positions about. that you can't do anything about, really, if you think about it. And so again, I'm very good, I think, at being at ease with the way things are. Now, if I could change the way things are, I'm going to do everything in my power to do so. But I don't suffer fools, and I do not expend energy needing and wanting certain circumstances to be different when I know that they cannot be, or I don't have the power to change them. So there's a freedom that comes with that as well, that I think I work really hard to be in bringing my day to day.
Oh, I love that. I mean, that's awesome. And I think that's like so valuable for people to hear from a professional like you. It's just like, hey, at the end of the day, they're like, I can't change everything in the world. And I mean, I wish I could, but I can't change everything in the world. And coming to terms with that is also important. You know, I think, I mean, as much as we want to live, and again, I talk about life without limitations. That's part of my vision of freedom myself. But I think living the reality of like, oh, I'd love to have world peace too.
Sure.
You know, and certainly something I'd push for, but the reality is like there's certain things that I will never be able to change.
Yeah.
Not on my own anyway. And so understanding what those things are and coming to terms with it.
Well, even take something in your own, again, more specific to your industry, inflation. Guess what? That's a huge factor for a lot of people. Nobody likes it. I don't want it. I wish it was lower. But sitting here persevering on it all day, it's like, what would be better? Okay, either for me, if it's such an issue, what can I figure out a way to earn more or be less stressed about it? Like, it is what it is. You know, the truth to me, okay, can I navigate through? Are we going to be okay? And if the answers are yes, it'll be a bit harder, but we'll be okay. Can I live according to that truth? Because then what's happening is I'm fighting the conditions, but they shouldn't be this way, but they aren't, but they shouldn't, but they are. There's so much additional suffering that's happening from just resisting what is. And again, I'm not saying be passive and float around in life. If you can change directly the conditions, go for it. Work your ass off. But for a lot of the big picture things, me or you sitting in my basement figuring out, how do I stop inflation? I don't. I don't. So I figure a way to live within the conditions as they are until they change. And I figure out ways to navigate through if I have to make an adjustment. And that's what gives me peace. And that's what gives me freedom. If my peace and freedom only happens when inflation changes, I don't have any. That's the point.
Right. Well, I think that's a great place to end off on today. And again, thank you so much, Jason. First guest, you were the only guest I could have possibly on the first time. But thanks so much for being here today and sharing your wisdom with all of us. And like I said, I'm going to have you back on to talk more about this because we could talk for hours, but we'll have to dive into another day.
My pleasure, man. Thank you, Grant. This was fun.
All right. Thanks, brother. Take it easy.
Cool.